Hey everybody, it's Forrest with you here with our kind tribe and my wonderful friend Boyd Bond, who's hanging out over on the Big Island of Hawaii. Hey Boyd, welcome to the show.
Hey, Forrest, thanks for having me.
Well, sure. You know what? It's fun to talk with you because it takes me right back into the vibe of Kohala that I spent 30 years in. And to me, there is a regional quality and a regional feel for what goes on in North Kohala. And you're one of the guys who carries that story. What what's a quick bit of history of your family in the region? I know some of it, but I'd love to hear you talk about that.
In Kohala region,
Kohala region, yeah, yeah.
my early ancestors came out as part of the missionary movement of the early 1800s. The missionary period is about 1820 to 1855.
Uh-huh.
And they were both teachers. And Elias had always been also been ordained as a congregationalist minister.
Uh,
And so he built schools and he built churches. And Mother Bond was also a teacher and wanted to teach girls, and she tried to set that up, but got busy running her own household, so her
I'm
dream
here
got delayed.
I'm hearing her voice in the background there. That's kind of cool.
But then after things had gotten established and the kids had grown, she got a chance to open her Kohala Girls School. So
Oh yeah.
the Kohala Girls School was a fixture in the islands, one of the best places to get an education. And Waimea Ranch the Parker Ranch would send their daughters of the cowboys to either Kamehameha schools on Oahu or to Kohala Girls School in Kohala.
Ah,
The girls could get an education and better themselves and not have to marry a cowboy,
ah.
or if they chose. And so that was one of the fixtures. They in 55 the US was headed towards the Civil War. Money wasn't as abundant, and so they decided to shut down the Sandwich Isles mission.
Ah.
And they told everybody, "We'll bring you home, or you can stay. But if you stay, we're not paying you anymore. You're on your own."
Ah.
So most of the missionaries still in the islands went home. Only a few stayed around. Wilcox is on Kauai. The Paris is down in Kona. I mean, yeah, the Lyman's in Hilo, Bonds in Kohala, and gave his whole life to the community. There was a number of epidemics that greatly reduced the population, and
Oh,
then we were less than 3,000 people in Kohala, and people were leaving to try and find work so they could pay land taxes because
wow.
private ownership was a new thing and nobody had physical money to pay with.
Wow.
So the population was leaving even more. So Father Bond started a plantation, sugar plantation, only 3,000 acres, which eventually doubled to 6,000,
Wow.
uh, to provide employment for the people. And the plantation lost money for 10 years, but they made payroll, and that was his goal.
Oh yeah.
And then other plantations popped up in the community, and the reciprocity treaty got signed with the US. Kalakaua went over in the early 1880s. And so plantations took off, and suddenly, and he had acquired land by working side jobs and then using the money to purchase land from the crown.
Uh-huh.
And then he gave that land to the plantation in exchange for stock because there was no startup money.
Oh yeah.
So after the plantations began with the reciprocity treaty, plantations became profitable. So instead of losing money, they made money. And that was an embarrassment to this, very Spartan missionary that had always lived off whatever he could grow.
Yeah.
So he gave all of the money to the construction of the girls' school in the first year he made a profit,
Ah.
and continued to give money to scholarship promising students. He'd send them over to Lahaina Luna School, the oldest school west of the Mississippi, I think, still going, more
Wow.
than 100 something, 150 years. Um, and then some of the more promising students would go on to colleges on the continent, and either West Coast or East Coast, and then come back and serve the islands. So the goal of the missionaries was not to bring more missionaries, it was to train the Hawaiians to become their own teachers and preachers and leaders in the community.
Wow.
And when the missionary period ended, 1/3 of the active Hawaiians in the field had been Father Bond's students.
Oh boy. No
But
kidding. No kidding.
just him, he produced, the majority or a large portion of the active teachers. Not just that they went through education, but that they actually stayed and continued in those careers to better their own people.
Nice.
So
Nice.
that's
Nice.
a big part of his legacy. Kohala Plantation, eventually the smaller, hard times, droughts and hurricanes and strikes and the occasional world war, the economy would shift.
Sure.
So the plantations merged and combined, and eventually when it closed down, I forget what the acreage was, 20,000, something
Wow.
huge that included a railroad and a harbor at Mahukona. And, all of this had been part of the sugar industry there.
Sure.
And some
Wow.
modern people aren't happy with the plantation because plantations aren't good environmental stewards.
Sure.
It's monocropping. They use fertilizers that are bad and poisons that are bad for people.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so they get mad at the plantation. And so some of them just carry that on to being mad at Father Bond, even though he was long gone before the
Oh.
plantation got big.
Uh-huh.
But a guy a professor at UH studied the premise. Did Father Bond's plan work? Because his premise was to provide employment to keep the population from declining. And he studied the population records, and actually, it shows that from the time the plantation opened, the population decline stopped, and it didn't shoot up, but it did slowly start to increase back toward that 3,000 people mark. And at
Okay.
that time, it was still mostly Hawaiians. Later on, other people came from other countries and
Yeah.
uh, came to work in the plantations. And Kohala today is well, a little more, not quite half Hawaiian, and the other half is mostly Japanese and Filipino
Yeah.
folks that are
Okay.
descended from
Good boy.
the
That's some
plantation
good
owners.
legacy insight.
And couple
Well,
Haole, couple Popolo, couple Puerto Ricans, some added folks for spice, but they're not a
good
majority.
one. I like it. That's good, brother. Well, hey, let me ask you. So what from that history, what's the vibe of North Kohala? And I mean literally, Kapa'au, right where you are. And, I spent a lot of time in Hawaii and Kapa'au and martial arts. But what would you say is the vibe of Kohala?
Wow, that's interesting. It's layered. It depends on what's going on. Basically, we have always been an isolated population, and so that's still in Kohala. Isolation is our strength. We have learned to do without the outside world for the most part, and to lean on each other
Right.
when those occasional world war or other disaster comes through. We exchange produce over the fence. We make
Uh,
sure everybody's taken care of when a storm hits or an earthquake comes. And that idea of taking care of each other, of being a community, is
yeah.
probably the number one uh, vibe, I guess. And then there's
Nice.
other things, that whole self-sufficiency attitude of growing your own, of making it yourself, fixing it yourself. That's still a thing. I mean, we're not entirely hicks. we have computers, we have TV. I remember when I came back to Koala after college, my mom was teasing me on the phone. She said, "Does Koala have computers yet?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, mom. I drive down the road. All the stores have computers, but Kohala, we don't always have electricity.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Sometimes the poles fall down on a mountain, and
Yeah.
so technology is great, but don't get used to it."
Wow. Well, Kohala, for folks who are listening, the Big Island of Hawaii is really big, and the distance between the town of Waimea and the town of Hawaii or Kapa'au is probably a good 20 miles, huh?
Yeah, just over the mountain is 20 Mile Road.
Over the mountain. So the power poles came over that road and on that road. And so if somebody is drunk or unruly or whatever and run into a post, it can knock out the power for North Kohala.
That's
Now,
the Kohala winds, bro. They take
the
it down.
Kohala wind can take it down. So having been there, they added the wind farm, and you would think, okay, well now they got their own power. No, not really. So that wind power farm, it provides power back to the main grid of the Big Island. Yeah, and doesn't necessarily mean that Kohala is independent as to electricity.
Well, actually, when they first put in that wind farm right on the point on the
Yeah,
island, great place to put a wind farm.
yeah.
There had been that hotel and townhouse and golf course development planned for Mahukona, and
Uh-huh.
the wind farm was supposed to power that.
Oh,
And
okay.
then that never materialized.
Uh,
Different things happened, protests, the economy shifted.
sure.
Yeah, man, yeah. So the wind farm was sitting there, and so then they plugged it back into the grid. It
Yeah.
does seem to flow downhill instead of flowing back toward us when we have power outages. Kind of odd.
Wow, that is odd. What a trip. Well, Boyd, what would you say is the future of Kohala, the feel of the town and of the people there? I lived there for a good while, but I was one of them fucking howlies, right? Did I tell you it took me 10 years to realize fucking howley was actually two words, right? That's right. So, anyway, in terms of the community growing and stable or whatever, what do you see happening in that way?
We're in the middle of that discussion now. The plantation held everybody together because we all work for the same company, but
Sure.
the plantation closed in 75. That's like two generations now
Yeah.
gone. And the community, the closeness of the community is still there, but there's a lot more newcomers that we got to train.
Sure.
We're losing a lot of our kids because there's not as much of the opportunities that there once were.
Sure.
So when they graduate, they go away or they go down the coast to work in the hotels, which is it's a job. It's a great first job, but it's
Yeah.
not necessarily
It's
the
not a
career
career.
all of them have envisioned. They all
Yeah.
want to be influencers. So we're trying to figure out how to put some of that vacant plantation land into production, modern agriculture.
Yeah.
The ditch that used to feed, that was built for the plantation back in 1906, when the plantation had money and manpower to throw at it, anytime there was a break in the flume or something, they could just fix it and get back to work. But nowadays, kind of a white elephant.
Yeah.
There's been a series of breaks from earthquakes or just age, and we've had to raise money, make a huge effort, get in bed with the state, do different things to try and make repairs. We got a broken section now near the source,
Oh.
and just to fix that one problem is $10 million.
Oh, geez, you're kidding.
So the idea of the ditch being there for ag is not necessarily a thing. There's some guys that when you say ditch, they spit and curse because they lost their aqua whatever industry or production area,
Yes.
and it could be plants and it could be prawns or whatever it was. It went dry when the ditch went dry, and they can't get back to business until the ditch comes back. So they hate
Sure.
it.
Yeah.
And there were some old wells, back when the plantations were all separate entities. They'd put a hole in the ground wherever they want.
Yeah.
Wasn't a rhyme or reason to it. Now, when they all merged, now we got all these holes in the ground. We could probably repurpose a lot of those, get them back into production, make a few more uphills so that we
Yeah.
don't need power to bring the water down.
Yeah.
So all of that's going to take 20 years. So that's why we're talking about it now, trying to figure out the plan, figure out who has what land, because other guys have come in and bought big sections, people with money.
Sure.
A lot of people don't have money. So,
Yeah.
we're always hat in hand trying to ask people to do the right thing. And for the most part, we've been lucky that people that come to Kohala get it, and they get involved in the community and they try and be part of this place. So they're open to listening. They don't always have the same vision we do right away, but
Yeah. Yeah.
we're looking at what the future is going to be like. Us old futs are trying to leave something behind for the young futs.
Yeah. What a trip, Boyd. Well, and when you speak about that's what we're talking about, it's you and who?
The usual suspects. Um, we meet in somebody's garage, and depends on if it's the agricultural subcommittee or if it's the community development plan committee or if it's the reunion committee or the different groups will gather at different times to discuss the different parts of the effort. And sometimes you see some of the same people at all the meetings, and
Yeah.
most of the time you see, different folks that are chasing whatever their interest and their skill set is.
Yeah. Yeah.
um
Yeah.
but
Wow.
it's community people, and then when we figure we kind of know where we want to go and what we want to do, then we can pull in our politicians, and they usually come.
Yeah. How
They
about
sit
that?
in our
Wow.
meetings, they listen, they tell us what they can and cannot do, and
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
um we try and go forward in steps like that. We're building the plane as we're flying it.
Yeah. Well, no kidding. No kidding. Good, everybody. Well, hey, you're hearing from Boyd Bond, one of my buddies in North Kohala, Big Island, Hawaii. And after all the years of me living there, I'm still learning a lot about the place and the culture and the history and all of that. I did appreciate you saying yes to coming on and doing a little chat.
Yeah, there's a time difference, so I gotta get up earlier than you guys.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it's like 9:15 now here. What time are you?
Oh, I don't know. 6:15. Yeah, 3 hours difference now.
Really? It's 3 hours. Wow.
So when we shift to 2 hours, I might be more regular. I don't know about this
Okay, good.
5:30
Well,
thing.
thanks for being on the call this morning. You bring a lot of great aloha, and I appreciate you and appreciate our friendship.
As do I, and it's fun to meet the various people that hui with you from time to time in these
Yeah.
meetings.
Yeah, good, good, good. Thanks, Boyd. I'm going to hit stop on the recording and we can keep talking.